The gunshot echoed through the valley, sending a flock of startled birds into the azure sky as Elizabeth Vaughn urged her mare faster across the open prairie. The year was 1889, just months after the land rush had opened the Oklahoma Territory to settlers, and she was running for her life. 3 men on horseback pursued her, their intentions as clear as the dust trail they kicked up behind them. They wanted the land deed in her saddlebag, the only thing left of her father's legacy, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. "Come on, Penny," Elizabeth shouted, leaning low over her horse's neck as another shot whistled past her ear. Her heart hammered in her chest, the thunder of hooves matching its frantic rhythm. The rolling grasslands stretched ahead, the distant silhouette of the Cimarron River offering hope. If she could just reach the river, she might lose them in the cottonwood groves that lined its banks. The spring rain had left the ground soft in places, mud sucking at Penny's hooves as they galloped across a low-lying area. Elizabeth glanced back, judging the distance between herself and her pursuers. The moment's inattention cost her dearly. Penny's foreleg plunged into an unseen prairie dog hole, the horse's momentum carrying them both forward in a tangle of limbs and terror. Elizabeth felt herself airborne, then crashing down with sickening force. Pain exploded in her leg as she landed hard, rolling several times before coming to rest face down in the tall grass. Behind her, Penny whinnied in distress, struggling to right herself. Elizabeth tried to stand but collapsed when her right leg buckled beneath her. A sob escaped her lips as she saw the unnatural angle of her ankle, blood already soaking through her riding skirt. The pounding hooves of her pursuers grew louder. She had seconds, maybe less. With desperate movements, she dragged herself toward a patch of scrub brush, clutching the deed to her chest. Her vision swam from the pain, but survival instinct drove her forward. Then another sound cut through the air, more hoofbeats, coming fast from the west. A single rider appeared over the rise, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. He rode like he was part of the horse itself, one hand holding reins, the other gripping a Winchester rifle. The stranger fired a warning shot into the air before leveling his weapon at Elizabeth's pursuers. "That's far enough." His voice carried across the prairie, deep and commanding. The 3 men reined in their horses, clearly reassessing their odds. The stranger urged his mount closer, keeping his rifle trained on them. Elizabeth could see him more clearly now, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind beneath the shadow of his Stetson. "The lady's with me," he called out. "Whatever business you got, you can take it up in town with the marshal." The leader of the pursuers, a man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes, spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he threatened, but he signaled to his companions and they wheeled their horses around, disappearing back the way they had come. Only when they were distant specks on the horizon did the stranger dismount, approaching Elizabeth with cautious steps. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with keen blue eyes that missed nothing as they assessed her injury. "Madam," he said, kneeling beside her, "looks like you've had quite a fall." Elizabeth tried to maintain her composure despite the throbbing pain. "My horse, please check on my horse." The man nodded, rising to his feet. "Name's Aaron Prescott, by the way," he said, tipping his hat before walking to where Penny had struggled to her feet but was favoring her front leg. "Elizabeth Vaughn," she replied through gritted teeth. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Prescott." Aaron examined the mare, running his hands gently down her injured leg. "Your horse has a sprain, but nothing broken, I reckon. She'll need rest." He returned to Elizabeth, his expression grim as he took in her bloodied ankle. "You, however, need more than rest. That ankle's either broken or badly sprained, and that cut needs tending before it festers." He knelt beside her again, removing his bandana. "May I?" At her nod, he gently lifted her skirt just enough to examine the wound, his touch professional and respectful. "Got a first aid kit in my saddlebag. I'll clean and bind this, but you need a proper doctor." "I live alone," Elizabeth said, wincing as he began to clean the wound with water from his canteen. "My homestead's half a day's ride east." Aaron worked methodically, cleaning the cut before retrieving a small medical kit from his saddlebag. "You're a homesteader, out here alone." There was no judgment in his voice, only concern. "My father died 3 months ago," she explained, watching as he expertly bandaged her ankle. "I'm proving up our claim." Aaron nodded, understanding the challenges she faced. The Homestead Act required settlers to improve their land over 5 years before gaining full ownership. For a woman alone, it was nearly impossible. "Those men?" he asked quietly, securing the bandage. Elizabeth hesitated, then decided truth was her best option. "Land grabbers. They've been trying to force me out since Father died. That paper thereafter is our deed." Aaron's jaw tightened. There's too much of that going around these days. He finished with the bandage and looked into her eyes. "Miss Vaughn, you need a doctor and your horse needs rest. The nearest town is Guthrie, about 10 miles west. I was headed there myself." He stood, surveying the landscape. "I'll get you home to my home, that is. My sister's place, really. She's married to Guthrie's doctor. You can get proper care there." Elizabeth started to protest, but Aaron was already gathering her belongings. "I can't impose, it's not imposing when it's offered freely," Aaron said firmly. "Besides, those men might circle back once they think I've moved on. You'll be safer in town." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she tested her bandaged ankle. The pain made her dizzy and she swayed against him. Without hesitation, Aaron swept her into his arms, carrying her to his horse. "I'll secure your mare to follow," he said, setting Elizabeth in the saddle before retrieving Penny's reins. "Hold tight. I'll walk alongside, lead both horses." As they set off toward Guthrie, Elizabeth clutched the saddle horn, acutely aware of the deed tucked safely inside her blouse and the steady presence of the cowboy walking beside her. The pain in her ankle pulsed with each step of the horse, but somehow, for the first time in months, she felt safe. Aaron Prescott glanced up at her, his blue eyes catching the late afternoon sun. "I'll get you home, Miss Vaughn. That's a promise." Elizabeth nodded, too exhausted and grateful to speak. In the vast Oklahoma territory where strangers were often threats, she'd found an unexpected ally. She didn't know then how this man would change her life, only that he already had. The journey to Guthrie proved more arduous than Elizabeth had anticipated. Each jolt of the horse sent waves of pain through her injured leg, and by the time the first buildings appeared on the horizon, she was pale and sweating, her knuckles white as she gripped the saddle horn. Aaron walked tirelessly beside the horse, occasionally glancing up with concern etched on his features. "Not much further now," he assured her, his voice steady and calm. "Doc Miller, my brother-in-law, he's the best physician in the territory." Elizabeth managed a weak smile. "I hope your sister won't mind an unexpected guest." "Sarah's been taking in strays since we were children," Aaron replied with a fond chuckle. "One more won't faze her." As they approached Guthrie, Elizabeth took in the bustling frontier town. Despite her pain, she couldn't help but be impressed by how quickly it had sprung up. Just months ago, this had been empty prairie. Now wooden buildings lined newly formed streets, with construction ongoing everywhere she looked. Wagons and horses crowded the thoroughfare, and people hurried about their business, the energy of the new settlement palpable in the air. "It's grown so much since I last passed through," she murmured. Aaron nodded. That's the land rush for you. One day nothing but grass, the next day a city of tents, and now, he gestured to the developing town. Guthrie's likely to be the territorial capital before long. He guided them down the main street, past the general store, the land office, and a saloon where piano music spilled out into the evening air. Finally, they reached a modest two-story home set slightly apart from the commercial buildings. A small sign beside the door read, "Dr. James Miller, physician." Before Aaron could call out, the front door opened and a woman emerged onto the porch. She shared Aaron's blue eyes and the same determined set to her jaw, though her features were softened by a warm smile. "Aaron," she exclaimed, then quickly assessed the situation. "What trouble have you brought me now, brother?" "The kind that needs James's attention," Aaron replied, helping Elizabeth down from the saddle. She tried to stand but immediately crumpled as her injured leg gave way. Aaron caught her, once again lifting her into his arms. "This is Miss Elizabeth Vaughn," he explained as he carried her toward the house. "Horse accident about 10 miles east. Ankles either broken or badly sprained, and she's got a nasty gash that needs proper cleaning." Sarah Miller was already holding the door wide, her expression shifting seamlessly from sister to nurse. "Bring her to the examination room, Aaron. I'll fetch James." The next hour passed in a blur for Elizabeth. Dr. Miller, a kind-faced man with spectacles and gentle hands, confirmed that her ankle was indeed broken, though thankfully a clean break. He cleaned the wound thoroughly, set the bone with practiced efficiency, and wrapped it in a proper splint. "You're fortunate Mr. Prescott found you when he did," the doctor told her as he worked. "Infections out on the prairie can turn deadly fast." Throughout the examination, Aaron had remained nearby, his presence a reassuring constant. Now, as the doctor finished his work, Aaron stepped forward. "How long until she can travel, James?" Dr. Miller shook his head. "Not for at least a week, preferably 2. That bone needs time to start knitting properly and she shouldn't put any weight on it." "But my homestead," Elizabeth protested weakly. "I can't leave it unattended for so long." "You won't have much of a homestead if you lose that leg to infection or if the bone heals wrong," Dr. Miller said firmly. Sarah, who had been assisting her husband, placed a gentle hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. "You'll stay with us, of course. We have a spare room upstairs." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Sarah interrupted with a smile that brooked no argument. "Consider it settled." Later, after being helped to the guest room and settled comfortably in bed, Elizabeth found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since the accident. The events of the day seemed almost dreamlike now: the chase, the fall, and the timely arrival of Aaron Prescott. A soft knock at the door roused her from her reverie. "Come in," she called. Aaron entered, carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of stew and a cup of tea. "Sarah thought you might be hungry," he said, placing the tray on the bedside table, "and I—" He paused, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "I wanted to check on you before I head out." Elizabeth's heart sank unexpectedly. "You're leaving?" "Just to the livery to see to the horses," he clarified. "I've got a room at the boarding house in town, but I'll be back in the morning." Relief washed over her, though she tried not to examine why the thought of his departure had affected her so strongly. "Mr. Prescott, I don't know how to thank you properly for your help today." Aaron shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Aaron, please, and there's no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Elizabeth replied softly. "Those men certainly wouldn't have." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of her pursuers. "About them. Do you know who they were?" Elizabeth sighed, pushing herself up straighter against the pillows. "The leader is Victor Holloway. He works for a man named Richard Blackwell, who's been buying up homesteads all over the territory. My father refused to sell, even when he was dying. Now they're trying to intimidate me into giving up our claim." Aaron's expression hardened. "Blackwell's developing quite a reputation." "None of it good. You know of him." "Know enough to steer clear," Aaron replied. "He doesn't take kindly to being refused." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Vaughn, Elizabeth," she interjected. "If I'm to call you Aaron, then you must use my given name." He smiled, the gesture transforming his weathered face. "Elizabeth, I think you should know that men like Holloway don't give up easily. They might come looking for you here in Guthrie." "I know," she said, her hand instinctively reaching for the deed she'd tucked beneath her pillow. "But I won't give up my father's land. It's all I have left of him." Aaron studied her for a long moment, respect evident in his gaze. "You're made of stern stuff, Elizabeth Vaughn." "Necessity breeds strength, Mr. Prescott," she replied with a small smile. "Now tell me about yourself. What brings you to this part of Oklahoma territory?" Aaron pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. "I've been working cattle drives most of my life," he explained. "Started as a drover when I was 16, worked my way up to trail boss by 25, but the open range is changing. Barbed wire, railroads. The days of the long drives are numbered. So you're looking for something new, something more permanent," he acknowledged. "Sarah and James settled here after the land rush. I've been saving to buy a small ranch nearby, establish a breeding operation with quality stock. Just waiting for the right piece of land." The irony wasn't lost on Elizabeth, "while I'm fighting to keep mine." "Life has a way of being contrary," Aaron agreed. He gestured to the tray of food. "You should eat while it's hot. Sarah's stew is worth recovering for." Elizabeth realized she was indeed famished. As she began to eat, Aaron rose from his chair. "I'll see to your mare," he promised. "She'll need a few days rest herself, but the sprain doesn't look serious." "Thank you," Elizabeth said, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Will you really come back tomorrow?" Something warm flickered in Aaron's eyes. "Count on it," he said quietly. "Rest well, Elizabeth." After he left, Elizabeth finished her meal, her mind whirling with thoughts of land deeds, persistent threats, and the unexpected kindness of a blue-eyed cowboy. As exhaustion finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was of Aaron's promise. "I'll get you home." Somehow, in this stranger's house in a town she barely knew, those words brought more comfort than she could have imagined. True to his word, Aaron returned the following morning. Elizabeth was surprised to find herself watching for him from the bedroom window, a flutter of anticipation in her stomach, when she spotted his familiar figure striding up the street. For the next several days, he became a constant presence, arriving each morning with fresh flowers from Sarah's garden or occasionally a newspaper from the general store. He would sit beside her bed, reading aloud the latest territorial news or simply talking about the town's rapid development. In the afternoons, when she grew restless from confinement, he helped her downstairs to the parlor where she could watch the bustling street through the window. On the fourth day, when Dr. Miller pronounced her ready for short outings as long as she used crutches, Aaron appeared at the door with a wheelchair he'd borrowed from another patient. "Your chariot awaits," he announced with a grin that transformed his usually serious face. "Where are we going?" Elizabeth asked as Sarah helped her into a fresh dress, one of Sarah's own, altered to fit her slighter frame. "I thought you might like to see a bit more of Guthrie than the doctor's front parlor," Aaron replied, "if you're feeling up to it." The prospect of escaping the confines of the house, even briefly, was too tempting to refuse. With Aaron's help, she settled into the wheelchair, and soon they were making their way down the boardwalk, Aaron carefully navigating around pedestrians and the occasional obstacle. Guthrie was even more impressive than Elizabeth had realized. Unlike many frontier towns that grew haphazardly, it had been planned with wide streets arranged in a grid pattern. The territorial government buildings were under construction, their imposing facades already hinting at the town's future importance. "It's remarkable," Elizabeth commented as they paused to watch workers raising the frame of what would become the territorial courthouse. "To think none of this existed 6 months ago." "That's the frontier for you," Aaron said, "full of possibilities for those brave enough to seize them." He wheeled her past the various businesses: the bank, the mercantile, a millinery shop, and several saloons. Outside one establishment, a sign advertised land auction, prime Oklahoma Territory homesteads. Elizabeth's good mood evaporated at the sight. How many of those properties were intimidated away from their rightful owners? She wondered aloud. Aaron followed her gaze, his expression darkening. "Too many, I suspect, which reminds me." He hesitated, then continued more softly, "I've been asking around about Blackwell and Holloway. Word is they've left town for a few days, headed south to look at some properties." "They'll be back," Elizabeth said with certainty. "Blackwell wants the entire section where my homestead sits. He won't give up easily." Aaron nodded grimly. "All the more reason to make sure you're fully recovered before you return." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a well-dressed man in his 40s, his expensive suit and gold watch chain marking him as someone of means. "Prescott," he greeted Aaron with a curt nod before turning his attention to Elizabeth. "And you must be Miss Vaughn. I've heard about your accident." Elizabeth felt Aaron stiffen behind her. "Miss Vaughn, this is Henry Marshall," he introduced, his voice carefully neutral. "Mr. Marshall owns the Guthrie Bank and Trust." "A pleasure, Miss Vaughn," Marshall said, tipping his hat. "I understand you have a homestead east of here. Difficult business for a woman alone." "I manage well enough, Mr. Marshall," Elizabeth replied coolly, instantly disliking his condescending tone. Of course," Marshall said with a dismissive wave. "But should you ever consider selling for a fair price, naturally I know several investors who might be interested." "My land isn't for sale," Elizabeth stated firmly. Marshall's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone has a price, Miss Vaughn. It's simply a matter of finding it." He glanced at Aaron, something unspoken passing between the men. "Good day to you both." As he walked away, Elizabeth turned as best she could in the wheelchair. "Friend of yours?" she asked Aaron. "Hardly," Aaron replied, his jaw tight. "Marshall's fingers are in every pie in Guthrie, and not always cleanly. He and Blackwell have been known to do business together." Elizabeth felt a chill despite the warm spring day. "Do you think he knows about the deed?" "I think we should head back," Aaron said, already turning the wheelchair around. "Some conversations are best had in private." Back at the Miller's house, Sarah took one look at their expressions and ushered them into the kitchen at the rear of the house, away from potential eavesdroppers. James joined them, setting his medical bag aside. "We saw Henry Marshall," Aaron explained without preamble. "He seemed unusually interested in Elizabeth's homestead." James and Sarah exchanged worried glances. "Marshall's been Blackwell's silent partner in several land deals," James said quietly. "It's not something that can be proven, but everyone knows." "If he knows you're here," Sarah added, turning to Elizabeth, "then Blackwell will know too as soon as he returns to town." Elizabeth's fingers twisted in her lap. "The deed is still safe," she assured them, having kept it with her constantly since her arrival. "But I can't stay here indefinitely, putting your family at risk. As soon as I'm able, I need to return to my homestead." "And do what?" Aaron demanded, more sharply than he'd intended. "Face Holloway and his men alone. They nearly killed you once." "I have a shotgun," Elizabeth retorted. and I know how to use it. One woman with a shotgun against 3 armed men isn't a fight, it's a tragedy waiting to happen, Aaron argued, pacing the small kitchen. Then what would you have me do? Elizabeth challenged. Abandon my father's land, sell to Blackwell. No, Aaron said firmly, stopping his pacing to look her directly in the eyes. But you need protection, someone to help you. And where am I to find such a person? Hired guns cost money I don't have. Aaron hesitated, then squared his shoulders. You don't need to hire anyone, I'll go with you. Elizabeth stared at him in disbelief. You barely know me. I know enough, he replied simply. I know you're brave and determined. I know you're fighting for something that matters, and I know I can help. Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on her brother's arm. Aaron, what about your plans? The ranch you want to buy, he shook his head. The land will still be there later. This can't wait. Dr. Miller cleared his throat. It's a generous offer, Aaron, but Elizabeth won't be ready to travel for at least another week, possibly 2. Then that gives us time to prepare, Aaron said decisively. Time to let the word spread that Elizabeth isn't alone anymore. Elizabeth was overwhelmed by his offer, emotions she couldn't fully identify welling up inside her. Part of her wanted to refuse out of pride, to insist she could handle her problems alone. But another part, a wiser part, perhaps recognized the truth in his words. She needed help, and Aaron Prescott was offering it freely. Why? She asked quietly, needing to understand. Why would you do this for me? Aaron's expression softened as he looked at her. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And because. He hesitated, seeming to choose his next words carefully. Because I believe some things are worth fighting for. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken meaning. Elizabeth felt her heart quicken as she held his gaze, seeing something in those blue eyes that both thrilled and frightened her. All right, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. When I'm well enough to travel, we'll go together. Aaron nodded, relief evident in his expression. Then it settled. As Sarah began preparing supper and James returned to his waiting patients, Elizabeth remained in the kitchen with Aaron, the weight of his promise hanging between them. Whatever came next, her life had irrevocably changed the moment her horse had stumbled on the prairie. Whether that change would lead to salvation or heartbreak remained to be seen, but looking at Aaron's determined face, Elizabeth found herself hoping for the first time in months that the future might hold more than mere survival. The next 10 days passed with surprising swiftness. Under Dr. Miller's careful attention, Elizabeth's ankle healed steadily, and by the end of the 2nd week, she could move about with only a slight limp and the aid of a walking stick. The cut had closed cleanly, leaving a thin scar that would fade with time. During her convalescence, Elizabeth's relationship with Aaron deepened in ways neither had anticipated. Their daily conversations ranged from practical discussions about her homestead's defenses to more personal revelations. Her childhood in St. Louis, his years on the trail, her father's dreams for their Oklahoma claim, his hopes for the future ranch he planned to build. In the evenings, they often sat on the Miller's front porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Sometimes they talked for hours, other times they sat in comfortable silence, each drawing strength from the other's presence. My father would have liked you, Elizabeth remarked one such evening, surprising herself with the admission. He always valued honesty and hard work above all else. Aaron smiled, his profile gilded by the fading light. What brought you and your father out here? Most women I know would prefer the comforts of city life to the hardships of a homestead. It wasn't my first choice, Elizabeth admitted. I was engaged to be married in St. Louis. Robert was a banker's son, respectable and secure. She twisted the walking stick in her hands, memories flooding back. When Father's business failed after the Panic of '83, Robert's family suddenly found me unsuitable. The engagement was broken and Father's health began to decline from the strain of it all. "I'm sorry," Aaron said quietly. Elizabeth shook her head. "Don't be. Father saw the land rush as a chance to start fresh. We'll build something that's truly ours," he told me. He was so alive during those first months on the claim, so full of purpose. Her voice softened. Even when he fell ill this past winter, he never lost his belief in what we were creating. Aaron studied her face in the gathering dusk. "And what about you? Do you share his vision for the homestead?" "I thought I was doing it for him at first," Elizabeth confessed, "continuing what he started out of duty and love. But now—" She looked out across the town toward the open prairie beyond. "Now I understand what he meant. That land is ours in a way nothing in St. Louis ever was. Every furrow, every fence post, every sapling we planted, it's a piece of ourselves taking root in the earth." Aaron nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why you won't sell." "That's why I can't sell," she corrected gently. "It would be like selling part of my soul." A comfortable silence fell between them as the first stars appeared overhead. Finally, Aaron spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I've been making arrangements," he said. "Bought some extra ammunition in town yesterday, and I've been working on repairs to your wagon. Doc says you'll be fit to travel by the end of the week." Elizabeth felt a curious mixture of anticipation and apprehension at the prospect of returning to her homestead. "Have there been any more sightings of Blackwell or Holloway? They're back in town," Aaron confirmed grimly. "Marshall's been seen meeting with them at the hotel. They know you're here, but they haven't made any moves yet." "They're waiting," Elizabeth surmised, "probably hoping I'll give up and sell." "They don't know you very well then," Aaron said with a wry smile. "I've never met a more stubborn woman." Elizabeth laughed, the sound carrying in the evening air. "My father called it determination of character. My mother called it pure mulishness." "Either way, it suits you," Aaron replied, his voice warm with admiration. Their eyes met in the twilight, and Elizabeth felt a now familiar flutter in her chest. Over the past weeks, her feelings for Aaron had grown from gratitude into something deeper, something that both excited and terrified her. He had become essential to her in ways she hadn't thought possible after the heartbreak of her broken engagement. But she had no claim on him beyond his freely given help. Once she was safely back on her homestead, once Blackwell's threats were dealt with, Aaron would move on to pursue his own dreams. The thought left an unexpected ache in her heart. "Elizabeth," Aaron began, seeming to sense her sudden melancholy. "There's something." The front door opened, spilling lamplight onto the porch as Sarah stepped out. "There you two are. James is home and supper's on the table." The moment broken, Elizabeth rose carefully from her chair, accepting Aaron's steadying hand. "We were just discussing plans for the journey back," she explained. Sarah's expression grew serious. "About that, James heard something troubling today. One of his patients works at the land office. Apparently, Blackwell has filed a challenge to your claim, Elizabeth. He's alleging abandonment since you've been away for over 2 weeks. "That's ridiculous," Elizabeth protested. "I've been injured. Surely that's considered a valid reason for temporary absence." "It should be," Sarah agreed. "But the land office is overwhelmed with disputes, and Blackwell has influence. The patient said there's to be a hearing next month." Aaron's jaw tightened. "All the more reason to get you back to your homestead as soon as possible. We need to show continuous occupation." "There's more," Sarah said hesitantly. "James's patient overheard Blackwell and Holloway talking. They mentioned making sure the claim remained empty until the hearing." A cold dread settled in Elizabeth's stomach. They're planning something. Aaron's hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip. We need to leave sooner than I thought. First light tomorrow if you're up to it. Elizabeth nodded, her decision made. I'll be ready. As they followed Sarah inside for supper, Elizabeth was acutely aware of Aaron's protective presence beside her. Whatever Blackwell was planning, she would face it not alone as she had feared, but with this steadfast cowboy who had become so much more than a chance rescuer. The realization brought both comfort and a new kind of vulnerability she hadn't expected. Dawn had barely broken when Aaron helped Elizabeth into the repaired wagon. Despite Dr. Miller's concerns that she was leaving too soon, she had insisted on their departure, packing her few belongings and the precious deed the night before. Sarah had supplied them with provisions, enough food for several days, extra bandages, and a bottle of laudanum for Elizabeth's ankle if the pain became severe. The medicine's a last resort, Dr. Miller cautioned as he handed Aaron the bottle. It dulls the mind as well as the pain. Aaron nodded, tucking it into his saddlebag. I'll make sure she rests when we stop midday. The parting with the Millers was emotional. In just 2 weeks, they had become like family to Elizabeth, their kindness a beacon during her recovery. Sarah embraced her tightly, pressing a small bundle into her hands. Biscuits for the journey, she explained, then added more quietly, and look after my brother. He pretends to be indestructible, but he's not. Elizabeth promised, understanding the concern behind Sarah's words. Aaron had made himself a target by aligning with her against Blackwell, a fact that weighed heavily on her conscience. The first few miles passed uneventfully as they traveled east out of Guthrie. Aaron rode alongside the wagon, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, one hand never far from his rifle. Elizabeth handled the reins, her restored mare, Penny, seemingly eager to be on the move again despite her recent injury. How far to your homestead? Aaron asked as the sun climbed higher. About 20 miles, Elizabeth replied. We should reach it by late afternoon if we maintain this pace. Aaron nodded, his expression thoughtful. We should stay alert as we get closer. If Blackwell's men are planning something, they'll likely be watching the property. They stopped briefly at midday beside a small creek to rest the horses and eat some of Sarah's biscuits with cold chicken. Elizabeth stretched her injured leg, massaging the ache that had begun to build from the wagon's constant jostling. How is it? Aaron asked, noticing her discomfort. Manageable, she assured him, though in truth the pain was more intense than she had expected. I'll be fine once we reach home and I can properly rest. Aaron's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't challenge her assessment. Instead, he helped her back into the wagon and checked the horses before they resumed their journey. As they traveled, the landscape gradually transformed from open prairie to more varied terrain, with gentle hills and scattered stands of trees breaking the horizon. Elizabeth felt a growing sense of homecoming as familiar landmarks appeared. The lightning-struck oak that marked the turn to the eastern section, the distinctive rock formation locals called the Sleeping Giant, and finally, the distant silhouette of the cottonwood grove that bordered her property. Just beyond those trees, she told Aaron, pointing ahead with rising excitement despite her fatigue. We're almost there. Aaron studied the approaching grove with a professional eye. Good defensive position, he noted. Anyone approaching would have to come through open ground. As they drew closer, however, Aaron suddenly held up his hand, signaling Elizabeth to stop the wagon. Something's not right, he said quietly, reaching for his rifle. Elizabeth followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. Thin wisps of smoke rose from beyond the cottonwoods from the direction of her cabin. No, she whispered, a cold dread washing over her. She flicked the reins, urging Penny forward, but Aaron caught them, stopping the wagon. "Wait," he cautioned. "It could be a trap." Elizabeth's hands trembled with fear and rage. "My home, I know," Aaron said grimly. "But rushing in blindly won't help. Stay here while I scout ahead." Every instinct screamed for her to charge forward to see for herself what had happened, but she recognized the wisdom in his caution. Nodding mutely, she watched as Aaron dismounted and moved silently into the trees, his rifle at the ready. The minutes of waiting stretched like hours. Elizabeth strained her eyes toward the cottonwoods, searching for any sign of Aaron's return or further evidence of what awaited beyond. The smoke had thinned slightly, suggesting whatever fire had been set was burning itself out rather than spreading. Finally, Aaron emerged from the trees, his face a mask of controlled anger as he approached the wagon. "Elizabeth," he began gently, "I'm sorry. The cabin has been burned." Though she had suspected as much, hearing the confirmation was still devastating. "Completely?" she managed to ask. "The roof and much of the interior are gone," Aaron confirmed. "The stone chimney and some of the log walls are still standing, but it's not habitable." He hesitated before adding, "This was deliberate, Elizabeth. There are tracks from at least 3 horses recently made." "Holloway," she said, her voice hardening with certainty. "Blackwell must have ordered this as soon as he learned we were leaving Guthrie." Aaron nodded grimly. "There's no one around now. They didn't stay to watch it burn. But we should approach carefully all the same." As they rounded the final bend in the trail, the full extent of the destruction came into view. What had once been a sturdy log cabin with a shake roof now stood in partial ruin, its blackened timbers stark against the afternoon sky. The small barn nearby had been spared, as had the vegetable garden her father had so carefully established. But the home Elizabeth had shared with him for the past year was little more than a charred skeleton. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to give in to despair. "At least the land is still mine," she said, clutching the deed that had never left her possession. "They haven't taken that." Aaron helped her down from the wagon, supporting her as they approached the ruins. The smell of smoke and wet ash hung heavy in the air, evidence that the attackers had thrown water on the fire before departing, not out of mercy, but to ensure the blaze wouldn't spread to the surrounding prairie and draw unwanted attention. "They knew what they were doing," Aaron observed, examining the pattern of the burn. "Started it from inside, probably using coal oil." Elizabeth moved carefully through what remained of her home, noting with bitter resignation that the few pieces of furniture, her father's chair, the table they had built together, the chest containing her mother's linens, had all been destroyed. Only the iron cookstove remained somewhat intact, though blackened by smoke. "They've taken everything," she said softly. "Not everything," Aaron corrected, pointing toward the barn. "You still have shelter for the animals, tools to rebuild, and land that will yield crops if tended." He met her gaze steadily. "And you're alive to fight another day." Elizabeth nodded, drawing strength from his unwavering confidence. "You're right. This is a setback, not an ending." As the initial shock subsided, practical concerns asserted themselves. "We can't stay in the open," she realized. Not with night approaching and Holloway potentially returning to check on his handiwork. "The barn," Aaron decided. "It's defensible, and we can make it comfortable enough for the night. Tomorrow we'll assess what can be salvaged and begin planning rebuilding efforts." Working together, they settled the horses in the barn's small corral and transformed a corner of the structure into temporary living quarters. Aaron found several undamaged horse blankets to create a makeshift bed, while Elizabeth discovered that her father's old steamer trunk, stored in the barn with tools and seeds, had escaped the destruction. Inside were a few changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, and a packet of letters, small treasures that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "At least I have these," she whispered, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting on the envelopes. As darkness fell, Aaron built a small, sheltered fire outside the barn door for cooking, carefully positioning it so the light wouldn't be visible from the main trail. They ate a simple meal from their provisions, the events of the day casting a somber shadow over their conversation. "They'll come back," Elizabeth said finally, voicing what they both knew. "Once they realize we've returned." Aaron nodded, his face illuminated by the firelight. "Yes, but they'll find us ready this time." "It's not your fight," Elizabeth said, the guilt she'd been suppressing finally surfacing. "I've dragged you into my troubles, put you at risk." "Elizabeth," Aaron interrupted gently. "I chose this. No one dragged me anywhere." "But why?" she pressed. "You barely knew me. You have your own dreams, your own plans. Why risk everything for my homestead?" Aaron was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames as if seeking words there. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and earnest. "When I found you that day on the prairie, you were injured and alone, outmatched by men who would take what was rightfully yours through violence and intimidation. I've seen too much of that in my life, people with power abusing those without it, simply because they can." He met her gaze across the fire. "But there was something about you even then. You weren't defeated. You were fighting back with everything you had." He paused, adding another small stick to the fire. "I admired that, and the more I came to know you during your recovery, the more I realized." He hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. "The more I realized that some things, some people are worth changing your plans for." The words hung between them, laden with meaning that Elizabeth scarcely dared interpret. Her heart pounded as she recognized the emotion in his eyes, the same one that had been growing in her own heart during the weeks of her recovery. "Aaron," she began, but was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats. Instantly, Aaron was on his feet, extinguishing the fire with a nearby bucket of water. "Into the barn," he ordered quietly, helping Elizabeth up. "Stay low and keep your shotgun ready." They retreated into the darkness of the barn, Aaron securing the door behind them. Through gaps in the weathered boards, they could make out 3 riders approaching from the direction of the main trail, lanterns swinging at their sides. "Holloway," Elizabeth whispered, recognizing the silhouette of the lead rider. Aaron positioned himself at a strategic gap in the boards, his rifle ready. "Let them come," he said grimly. "They'll find more than they bargained for this time." In the tense silence that followed, Elizabeth realized that despite the danger, despite the destruction of her home and the threat still approaching, she felt a curious sense of rightness standing beside this man who had chosen to fight alongside her. Whatever happened next, she was no longer facing it alone, and that made all the difference in the world. Holloway and his men circled the ruins of the cabin, their lanterns casting eerie shadows across the charred timbers. Elizabeth held her breath as they dismounted, examining the destruction with evident satisfaction. "Burn went just like you said it would, Victor," one of the men commented, kicking at a blackened beam. "Nothing left worth saving." "Blackwell will be pleased," Holloway replied, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "With the cabin gone and the woman still laid up in town, the claim's as good as abandoned." "What about Prescott?" the third man asked. "I heard he's been sniffing around, asking questions." Holloway spat on the ground. "Just a saddle tramp with delusions of heroism. If he gets in our way, he'll regret it." He gestured toward the barn. "Check in there. Make sure we didn't miss anything valuable." Elizabeth tensed, her grip tightening on her shotgun. Beside her, Aaron shifted slightly, his aim steady as the man approached the barn door. "Hold it right there," Aaron called out, his voice hard as iron. "This property is occupied and defended. I suggest you gentlemen move along." The man froze, hand halfway to the door latch. "Victor," he called out nervously. "Someone's in there." Holloway and the other man quickly drew their weapons, taking cover behind the remains of the cabin wall. "Prescott," Holloway shouted, "that you playing guardian angel again?" "Miss Vaughn and I are simply protecting her legal claim," Aaron replied calmly. "The one you tried to destroy by burning her home." A harsh laugh answered him. "Burning? That's a serious accusation. We just rode by to check on an abandoned property. Public service, you might say." "The land office might be interested in your version of public service," Aaron countered. "Especially when they see the coal oil can you left behind the woodpile." A tense silence followed. Elizabeth could almost feel Holloway recalculating his odds. 3 against 2, but Aaron's reputation as a marksman was well established, and they were now forewarned and in a defensive position. "The smart play here is to leave," Aaron continued, his voice reasonable but unyielding. "Tell Blackwell that Miss Vaughn has returned to her claim and intends to stay. Any further attempts against her property or person will be met with deadly force, followed by a visit to the federal marshal in Guthrie." Elizabeth heard muttered conversation among the 3 men, though she couldn't make out the words. Finally, Holloway called back, "This isn't over, Prescott, not by a long shot. Blackwell doesn't give up what he wants, and neither do I." "Your choice," Aaron replied. "But remember, next time you might not get a warning before I start shooting." After another moment of tense silence, the men remounted their horses. "We'll be seeing you both real soon," Holloway promised, his voice thick with menace before they rode away into the darkness. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Aaron lower his rifle. "They won't go far," he predicted grimly. "Probably camp within a mile or two, wait for another opportunity." Elizabeth released a shaky breath, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her light-headed. "You were magnificent," she said softly. "I've never heard anyone face down 3 armed men so calmly." Aaron smiled slightly, though his eyes remained alert. Trail boss for 15 men on a 1,000-mile cattle drive gives you plenty of practice at bluffing. He checked the barn door's simple latch, reinforcing it with a length of rope. "We'll take watches tonight, just in case they decide to try their luck again." "I'll take first watch," Elizabeth volunteered, but Aaron shook his head. "You need rest more than I do," he insisted gently. "Your ankle's been through enough today. I'll wake you in a few hours." Too exhausted to argue, Elizabeth settled onto the makeshift bed of blankets, her shotgun within easy reach. Despite her determination to stay alert, the events of the day soon caught up with her, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. She woke sometime later to find Aaron sitting beside her, his back against the barn wall, rifle across his knees. The pale light filtering through the barn boards suggested dawn was approaching. "You didn't wake me for my watch," she accused softly. Aaron shrugged. "You needed the rest. And you didn't." "I've gone longer without sleep," he replied simply, then added with a slight smile, "Besides, I liked watching over you." The quiet intimacy of the moment caught Elizabeth by surprise, warming her despite the pre-dawn chill. She sat up, wincing slightly as her ankle protested the movement. "Let me see," Aaron said, setting aside his rifle to examine her injury. His touch was gentle as he unwrapped the bandage, his brow furrowing as he noted the swelling. "The journey was too much, too soon. You should have stayed in Guthrie another few days. And given Blackwell more time to undermine my claim." "No," Elizabeth shook her head firmly. "The ankle will heal. My right to this land might not have survived another week of absence." Aaron rewrapped the bandage with practiced ease. Stubborn woman, he muttered, but there was admiration in his tone. Determined, she corrected with a small smile, echoing their conversation from the miller's porch. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the danger surrounding them seemed to recede, leaving only this fragile connection between them. The moment was broken by the sound of a horse whinnying outside. Aaron was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle as he moved silently to the barn door. Elizabeth grabbed her shotgun, positioning herself where she could cover him if necessary. Aaron peered through a crack in the boards, then relaxed slightly. "It's not Holloway," he reported. "Looks like a single rider coming from the east." Elizabeth joined him at the door, trying to make out the approaching figure in the growing light. "That's odd. There's nothing east of here but open prairie for miles." As the rider drew closer, Aaron's posture changed, recognition dawning in his expression. "I know him," he said, sounding surprised. "That's Caleb Wilson. He was a drover with me on the last cattle drive I bossed." He unbarred the barn door, though he kept his rifle ready as he stepped outside to greet the newcomer. Elizabeth followed more slowly, her shotgun lowered but accessible. The rider, a wiry young man with a shock of sandy hair visible beneath his hat, reined in his horse when he spotted Aaron. "Mr. Prescott," he called out, relief evident in his voice. "Thank the Lord I found you, Caleb," Aaron acknowledged, his tone curious rather than alarmed. "What brings you all the way out here? And how did you know where to look?" The young man dismounted, looking weary from hard riding. "Your sister told me you'd headed east with Miss Vaughn. I've been following your trail since yesterday." He glanced nervously at Elizabeth before continuing. "I wouldn't have interrupted, but there's trouble. Marshal Jenkins sent me to find you." "What kind of trouble?" Aaron asked sharply. "Blackwell," Caleb replied. "He's filed formal charges against Miss Vaughn in Guthrie, claims she stole valuable documents from him during a business negotiation." "That's absurd," Elizabeth protested. "I've never even met the man, let alone stolen from him." Caleb nodded sympathetically. "Marshall knows it's likely false, madam, but Blackwell's got witnesses swearing to it, including that banker, Marshall. There's a warrant for your arrest." Elizabeth felt the blood drain from her face. "He's trying to force me off my land by having me jailed." "Or worse," Aaron said grimly. "A woman alone in territorial custody. It would be easy to arrange an accident." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Blackwell's claiming that you're his accomplice, Mr. Prescott. Says you helped her escape Guthrie to avoid prosecution." Aaron's jaw tightened. "That explains why Holloway and his men didn't press the attack last night. They're letting the law do their dirty work." "Marshal Jenkins is a good man," Caleb assured them. "He doesn't believe the charges, but his hands are tied with sworn statements. He sent me unofficially to warn you both. Said you'd know what to do." Elizabeth sank onto a nearby stump, the implications overwhelming her. "What can we do?" "If we go to Guthrie to fight the charges, I lose my claim to abandonment. If we stay here, we're fugitives." Aaron was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he considered their limited options. "We need evidence against Blackwell," he said finally. "Something that proves he's fabricating these charges, something that exposes his land-grabbing scheme." "But how?" Elizabeth asked. "All our evidence was in the cabin." "Not all of it," Aaron corrected, a determined glint in his eyes. "The deed is safe with you. And I'm betting Blackwell keeps records of his operations, records that would incriminate him if found." Caleb nodded eagerly. "Marshal Jenkins hinted at something similar. Said if you could find proof of Blackwell's real business, he'd have grounds to dismiss the charges and investigate Blackwell instead." Aaron turned to Elizabeth, his expression serious. "It's risky," he admitted, "but I think our best chance is to go on the offensive." Instead of hiding or running, we need to expose Blackwell before he can consolidate his position. Elizabeth considered his words, weighing their precarious situation. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and now apparently outlaws in the eyes of the law. Yet there was something compelling about Aaron's refusal to concede defeat, his unwavering belief that justice could still prevail. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "Blackwell maintains an office in Guthrie," Aaron explained. "If his operation is as extensive as we believe, he must keep records, deeds, agreements, perhaps even evidence of threats and intimidation against other homesteaders." "You want to break into his office," Elizabeth clarified, both alarmed and intrigued by the audacity of the plan. Aaron nodded. "Not me, us. Tonight, while Holloway and his men are watching your property, expecting us to be here." "But the warrant works to our advantage," Aaron interrupted. "Everyone will be looking for us to either flee the territory or hole up here. No one will expect us to return to Guthrie so soon." Elizabeth considered the plan, her initial shock giving way to calculated assessment. It was dangerous, potentially disastrous if they failed, but it offered a chance to fight back rather than merely defend. After months of feeling powerless against Blackwell's machinations, the prospect of taking action, however risky, held undeniable appeal. "I'm in," she decided, straightening her shoulders. "But what about my claim?" "If we both leave, that's where I come in, madam," Caleb interjected. "Mr. Prescott told me about your situation on the ride over. I'd be honored to stay and watch your property while you're gone. I'm a fair shot, and nobody knows I'm connected to either of you." Aaron clasped the younger man's shoulder gratefully. "It's asking a lot, Caleb." "You saved my life on that cattle drive when the river flooded," Caleb replied simply. "I owe you more than I can repay." With Caleb's offer resolving their immediate concern about abandoning the homestead, Aaron outlined his plan in greater detail. They would leave at dusk, taking a circuitous route back to Guthrie to avoid detection. Once there, they would seek help from Sarah and James Miller, who could provide information about Blackwell's office and perhaps create a distraction if needed. "What if we don't find anything?" Elizabeth asked as they prepared for the journey. Aaron met her gaze steadily. "Then we'll find another way," he promised. "But we will find something. Men like Blackwell always leave tracks if you know where to look." As the day progressed, they worked together to strengthen the barn's defenses for Caleb and gather supplies for their nighttime mission. Despite the danger ahead, Elizabeth felt a growing sense of purpose, replacing the despair that had threatened to overwhelm her at the sight of her burned cabin. When evening came and they prepared to depart, she took a final look at what remained of her homestead: the charred ruins of the cabin, the untended fields, the small garden now beginning to show signs of neglect. It was a sobering sight, but no longer a defeating one. "We'll rebuild," Aaron said quietly, reading her thoughts. "Better than before." Elizabeth nodded, touched by his use of we rather than you. Somewhere during these tumultuous days her struggle had become their struggle, her future entwined with his in ways neither had anticipated. "Let's go bring Blackwell to justice," she said, mounting her mare with renewed determination. "It's time he learned that not everyone can be intimidated or bought." As they rode away under the cover of deepening twilight, Elizabeth felt Aaron's steady presence beside her like a shield against the uncertainty ahead. Whatever awaited them in Guthrie, success or failure, vindication or further peril, they would face it together. That knowledge alone gave her a courage she hadn't known she possessed. The journey back to Guthrie was tense and arduous. They traveled mostly by night, keeping to less used trails and avoiding the main roads where Blackwell's men or lawmen might be patrolling. Aaron's experience from his cattle driving days proved invaluable as he navigated by stars and landmarks, always alert for signs of pursuit. Elizabeth's ankle throbbed persistently, but she refused to complain or slow their progress. There was too much at stake now, not just her homestead, but Aaron's freedom as well. The thought that he might face jail or worse because of his loyalty to her was unbearable. On the second night, as they rested their horses in a sheltered ravine, Elizabeth finally voiced the concern that had been growing since they left the homestead. "Aaron," she began hesitantly, "if this doesn't work, if we're caught, you should claim I deceived you. Say you didn't know about the warrant or the charges." Aaron looked at her sharply. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd save myself by sacrificing you?" "No," she said quickly. "I know you wouldn't. That's why I'm asking you to. This is my fight, my land. You've already risked too much." In the dim starlight, she saw his expression soften. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Elizabeth," he said quietly, "this stopped being just your fight the moment I found you injured on the prairie. Maybe even before that, though I didn't know it yet." "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart quickening at his touch. Aaron seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man typically so direct. "I've spent most of my adult life wandering," he finally said. "Driving cattle, moving from job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I told myself I was saving for my ranch, that I was working towards something, but the truth is—" He paused, his grip tightening slightly. "The truth is, I was just existing, not really living." Elizabeth held her breath, sensing he was sharing something he rarely articulated. "Then I found you," he continued, his voice low but intense. "Wounded but fighting, vulnerable but undefeated. And in these weeks, watching you heal, helping you return home, seeing your determination to defend what's yours, I've felt more alive, more purposeful than in all my years of wandering." "Aaron," she whispered, deeply moved by his confession. "So don't ask me to claim deception or abandon you if trouble comes," he finished firmly. "Whatever happens in Guthrie, we face it together. There's no going back for me, Elizabeth. Not anymore." The depth of emotion in his words left her speechless. In that moment, she recognized that what had been growing between them was more than gratitude or convenience or even simple attraction. It was something profound and life-altering, something neither of them had been seeking but both now found indispensable. Wordlessly, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, communicating what words could not fully express: their shared fears, their growing love, their determination to forge a future together despite the obstacles before them. When they finally broke apart, Aaron rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "We should try to get some rest," he murmured reluctantly. "Tomorrow night we reach Guthrie." Elizabeth nodded, though rest seemed impossible with her heart still racing from their kiss. As they settled side by side beneath the stars, Aaron's arm protectively around her shoulders, she found herself praying not just for the success of their mission, but for the chance to explore this newfound connection, to discover what they might become together if given the opportunity. They reached the outskirts of Guthrie the following evening, approaching from the north to avoid the main roads into town. The lights of the growing settlement glowed against the darkening sky, both welcoming and threatening in their current circumstances. "We need to get to the Millers without being seen," Aaron said as they tethered their horses in a stand of trees well outside town. "Once darkness falls completely, we'll make our way in." Elizabeth nodded, adjusting her clothing. She had changed into one of Aaron's spare shirts and a pair of trousers, her hair tucked up under a battered hat. From a distance, She could pass for a young man, a disguise that might prove useful if they encountered patrols looking for a woman. As full darkness descended, they moved cautiously toward town, keeping to shadows and avoiding the more populated areas. The journey was slow, with Aaron frequently signaling for them to freeze or take cover as townspeople or the occasional lawman passed nearby. Finally, they reached the alley behind the miller's house. Aaron tapped lightly on the back door, a pattern that Sarah would recognize as his. Moments later, the door opened a crack, Sarah's concerned face appearing in the gap. "Aaron," she whispered, quickly ushering them inside and securing the door behind them. "We've been sick with worry. There are wanted posters with both your names all over town." James Miller appeared from the front of the house, his expression grave. "You're taking an awful risk coming back here," he said, shaking Aaron's hand. "Marshal Jenkins has been under pressure to form a posse to track you down." "We know," Aaron replied grimly. "That's why we're here. We need to end this once and for all." Over cups of strong coffee in the miller's kitchen, Aaron outlined their plan to search Blackwell's office for incriminating evidence. Sarah and James exchanged worried glances as they listened. "It's dangerously close to breaking the law," James cautioned when Aaron had finished. "We're already accused of worse," Elizabeth pointed out. "At least this way we have a chance to clear our names." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "We'll help however we can," she assured them. "James's practice has suffered since Blackwell learned of our connection to you both. He's been spreading rumors, turning patients away. We have as much reason as anyone to want him exposed." James nodded his agreement. "Blackwell's office is above the land auction house on Main Street. He keeps irregular hours, sometimes there late into the night, sometimes not there for days. From what I've observed, he's been spending most evenings at the hotel bar, probably celebrating what he believes is his victory over you." "Any guards?" Aaron asked. "Just a clerk during business hours," James replied. "At night, the building's typically empty except for the caretaker who lives in a room off the back entrance. Old fellow named Simmons. Drinks himself to sleep most nights." Aaron considered this information. "What about a distraction?" "Something to ensure that if Blackwell is at his office tonight, he'll leave for a while." Sarah's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "The medical emergency plan," she suggested to her husband. "Remember when we practiced it during the influenza outbreak last winter?" James caught on quickly. "Perfect. I could send a messenger to wherever Blackwell is, claiming a patient of importance is asking for him specifically. Someone supposedly on their deathbed, wanting to discuss a land sale before passing." "Would he come?" Elizabeth asked skeptically. "For the prospect of acquiring more land at a bargain price." "Absolutely," James confirmed. "His greed is predictable, if nothing else." With the distraction arranged and information about the office building secured, they refined their plan for the night ahead. Sarah provided them with clean clothing that wouldn't attract attention, while James sketched a rough layout of Blackwell's office based on his one visit there months earlier. "What exactly are we looking for?" Elizabeth asked as they prepared to leave, the town clock striking 10. "Anything that documents his methods," Aaron replied. "Letters threatening homesteaders, records of bribes to officials, evidence that he's fabricated the charges against us. Blackwell's been operating in this territory for over a year. He must keep records of his transactions, legal and otherwise." As they prepared to depart through the back door, Sarah embraced Elizabeth fiercely. "Be careful," she whispered. "Both of you." "We will," Elizabeth promised. "And thank you for everything." "Just come back safely," Sarah replied. "That's all the thanks we need." Moving through the shadows of nighttime Guthrie, Elizabeth felt a curious calm descend upon her. Perhaps it was the certainty that they were finally taking action rather than merely reacting. Or perhaps it was simply Aaron's steadfast presence beside her. Whatever the cause, her earlier fear had been replaced by resolute determination. They reached the land auction house without incident, circling to the rear of the building where a narrow staircase led to the second floor. As James had predicted, the caretaker's quarters showed a light, but no sound or movement came from within. The back entrance to the offices was locked, but Aaron made short work of it with tools he'd borrowed from James. "Where did you learn to pick locks?" Elizabeth whispered as they slipped inside. "Misspent youth," Aaron replied with a grin that flashed white in the darkness. "My father was the town blacksmith. I helped with all kinds of mechanisms." The second-floor hallway was dark and silent. Following James's directions, they located Blackwell's office at the end of the corridor, its frosted glass door bearing his name in gilt lettering. Richard Blackwell, Land Investments. This door proved more challenging, but Aaron eventually defeated its lock as well. They slipped inside, closing the door softly behind them. Using a small hooded lantern James had provided, they surveyed the space, an opulent office with leather furnishings, expensive artwork, and a massive oak desk dominating the center of the room. "Check the desk," Aaron directed in a hushed voice. "I'll look for a safe or hidden compartments in the walls." Elizabeth moved to the desk, methodically searching through its drawers. Most contained mundane business papers, land surveys, purchase agreements, correspondence with banks. But in the bottom drawer, locked and requiring another display of Aaron's skills to open, she found something more promising: a leather-bound ledger with no identifying marks on its cover. "Aaron," she called softly, opening the book. "I think this is it." He joined her, holding the lantern closer as they examined the contents. The ledger contained detailed records of Blackwell's land acquisitions throughout the territory, with notations beside each entry that made Elizabeth's blood run cold. Owner threatened with rustling charges, sold at 30% value. Arranged for Indian troubles, owner abandoned claim. Marshal bribed to arrest owner, property claimed for taxes. "My God," Aaron murmured, turning the pages. "He's been systematically terrorizing homesteaders across the entire territory." Elizabeth's finger traced down the entries until she found her own name. Vaughn, homestead, father deceased, daughter vulnerable, Marshal to provide legal pressure if necessary. Deadline, June 1889. "He's documented his own crimes," Aaron said with grim satisfaction. "This is exactly what we need." A sound from the hallway froze them both. Footsteps, heavy and purposeful, approached the office door. Aaron quickly extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness as the footsteps stopped outside. "Should be here somewhere," a voice muttered, Blackwell's voice. Keys jingled as he searched for the right one. Aaron pulled Elizabeth toward a heavy curtain covering a window alcove. They slipped behind it just as the office door opened and the lights flared to life. Blackwell entered, followed by Holloway. Both men looked annoyed. "Wild goose chase," Holloway grumbled. "No dying man at the hotel. Nobody sent for you." "Someone's playing games," Blackwell agreed, moving to the sidebar to pour himself a drink. "That fool Jenkins, perhaps, trying to catch us off guard." From their hiding place, Elizabeth could see the open ledger still lying on the desk, painfully obvious in the lamplight. She held her breath, waiting for Blackwell to notice it. "What's this?" Blackwell demanded, spotting the ledger. "Who's been in my office?" Holloway moved to the desk, his hand dropping to his gun. "The drawer's been forced," he noted. "Someone's broken in." Blackwell cursed, quickly scanning the room. "Check behind those curtains," he ordered Holloway, reaching for a revolver in his desk drawer. Aaron tensed beside her, his hand moving to his own weapon. Elizabeth knew they were cornered. A fight now would likely end badly for all involved. They needed another option quickly. As Holloway approached the curtain, inspiration struck. Elizabeth stepped out before Aaron could stop her, her hands raised. "Mr. Blackwell," she said calmly, "I believe we finally meet in person." Blackwell and Holloway both started in surprise, weapons training on her instantly. "Miss Vaughn," Blackwell recovered quickly, a cold smile spreading across his fleshy face. "How kind of you to save us the trouble of hunting you down. Are you alone, or is your cowboy hero lurking about as well?" "Alone," Elizabeth lied smoothly. "Mr. Prescott and I parted ways when we learned of the charges against us. He believed you might be more reasonable if I approached you directly, woman to man." Blackwell's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but the appeal to his ego seemed to work. He gestured for Holloway to search the rest of the office nonetheless. "And what did you hope to accomplish by breaking into my office, Miss Vaughn?" "Information," Elizabeth replied truthfully. "I wanted to understand what I was up against, why you're so determined to have my land in particular." Blackwell chuckled, moving around the desk to close the incriminating ledger. "Your land sits at the junction of 3 waterways, Miss Vaughn. Once the railroad spur is completed next year, it will be ideal for a shipping depot, worth 50 times what your father paid for it." "So this was never about ranching or farming," Elizabeth said, stalling for time as Holloway continued his search of the office. "It's about the railroad. Progress, Miss Vaughn. The future." Blackwell gestured expansively, something a woman alone could never develop properly. "I was doing you a favor offering to buy you out. By burning my home. By filing false charges against me," Blackwell shrugged, unrepentant. "Business sometimes requires persuasion. You proved unexpectedly stubborn." "She's alone, boss," Holloway reported, returning from checking the adjoining rooms. "No sign of Prescott." "Good," Blackwell said, his smile turning predatory. "Then we can resolve our business without interference. Holloway, fetch the marshal. Tell him we've apprehended one of the fugitives he's seeking." "That won't be necessary," a new voice announced from the doorway. Marshal Jenkins stood there, revolver drawn and aimed squarely at Blackwell. Behind him were 2 deputies and, to Elizabeth's surprise, Aaron. "Jenkins," Blackwell sputtered, "what is the meaning of this intrusion?" "I received information that crimes were being planned in this office tonight," Jenkins replied coolly. "Appears I arrived just in time." He nodded toward the ledger on the desk. "That the book you mentioned, Prescott?" Aaron stepped forward, picking up the ledger. "This documents every illegal act Blackwell's committed across the territory, Marshal, including the fabricated charges against Miss Vaughn and myself." Jenkins took the book, quickly scanning several pages. His expression hardened with each entry. "Richard Blackwell, Victor Holloway, you're both under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy for starters." He nodded to his deputies, who moved to handcuff the stunned men. "This is outrageous," Blackwell protested. "I'm a respected businessman." "You can't possibly believe." "Save it for the judge," Jenkins interrupted. "After I telegraph the federal authorities about the extent of your operations, you'll have plenty of explaining to do." As the deputies led the prisoners away, Jenkins turned to Elizabeth and Aaron. "That was a damn fool risk you 2 took," he said gruffly. "Breaking in, confronting armed men, you're lucky to be alive." "How did you know to come?" Elizabeth asked, still processing the sudden turn of events. Jenkins nodded toward Aaron. "Your friend here came to me directly after dropping you off, said you'd found evidence but might need backup. Good thing he did, too." Elizabeth turned to Aaron in surprise. "You went to the marshal. When?" "While you were changing at the Millers," Aaron admitted. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure he'd believe me without evidence." He glanced at Jenkins. "No offense, Marshal." "None taken," Jenkins replied. "In my position, you learn to be cautious about accusations. But I've had my suspicions about Blackwell for months, just lacked the proof to act on them." He gestured toward the ledger. "This changes everything. The warrants against you both are rescinded, effective immediately." The relief that washed over Elizabeth was so profound she felt light-headed. "So we're free to go. Back to my homestead, free as birds," Jenkins confirmed. "Though I'll need statements from you both tomorrow for the official record." He tipped his hat. "Get some rest, you've earned it." After the marshal departed, Elizabeth turned to Aaron, emotions warring within her: relief, gratitude, and a hint of hurt at his deception. "Why didn't you tell me about going to Jenkins?" she asked quietly. Aaron took her hands in his expression earnest. "I couldn't risk you talking me out of it," he admitted. "And I couldn't risk you facing Blackwell alone if things went wrong. I needed a contingency plan. So when I stepped out from behind that curtain, I was already gone getting Jenkins," Aaron confirmed. "I slipped out the window when I heard them at the door. I knew you'd find a way to stall them." His eyes held hers intently. "I'm sorry for not telling you, but I'm not sorry for protecting you." Elizabeth studied his face, finding only sincerity in his features. The last remnants of her hurt faded, replaced by understanding. "You're forgiven," she said softly. "On one condition." "Name it," Aaron replied immediately. "No more secrets between us," she said firmly. "If we're in this together, whatever this is, then we trust each other completely. No protection through deception, no matter how well-intentioned." Aaron's expression softened and he drew her closer. "I can agree to that," he murmured. "As for what this is—" He paused, suddenly seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "That depends on you, Elizabeth." "What do you want it to be?" In the quiet of the now empty office, with the immediate danger behind them and the future stretching ahead, Elizabeth found clarity. The events of recent weeks, from her injury on the prairie to this moment of victory, had transformed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. But one thing was certain: Aaron Prescott had become essential to her happiness. "I want it to be a beginning," she said simply. "For both of us." Aaron's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. Without words, he drew her into his arms, sealing their agreement with a kiss that promised much more than mere partnership against adversity. It promised a shared life, built on trust, respect, and deepening love. When they finally left Blackwell's office, stepping into the cool night air of Guthrie, Elizabeth felt as though she was crossing a threshold not just from captivity to freedom, but from isolation to connection. Whatever challenges lay ahead in rebuilding her homestead and securing her claim, she would not face them alone. That certainty, more than anything else, made the future seem bright with possibility. The trial of Richard Blackwell became the sensation of the Oklahoma Territory throughout the summer of 1889. The evidence from his ledger implicated not only Blackwell and Holloway, but also several officials who had been bribed to look the other way. Henry Marshall narrowly escaped prosecution by turning state's evidence, though his reputation was irreparably damaged. Elizabeth's testimony was pivotal to the case, her clear-eyed recounting of the threats and destruction visited upon her homestead, moving even the most stoic members of the jury. When the verdict of guilty was announced on all counts, sentencing Blackwell to 15 years in federal prison, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. Aaron stayed by her side throughout the proceedings, his steady presence a constant reminder that her days of facing adversity alone were over. When they weren't required in Guthrie for the trial, they worked tirelessly on rebuilding her cabin, often with help from Sarah, James and Caleb Wilson, who had kept his promise to protect the property during their absence. By late August, a new cabin stood on the site of the old one, larger, sturdier, with proper windows and a covered porch that caught the evening breeze. The fields had been tended, though too late for a full harvest that year. Still, Elizabeth felt enormous satisfaction in watching the homestead come back to life under their combined efforts. One evening, as they sat on the new porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and crimson, Aaron seemed unusually thoughtful, almost nervous. "Something on your mind?" Elizabeth asked, noticing how he repeatedly touched the pocket of his vest. Aaron smiled ruefully. "That obvious, is it?" He took a deep breath, then turned to face her directly. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, yours, mine, ours." Elizabeth's heart quickened. And I've made a decision about my ranch," he said, reaching for her hand. "I'm not going to buy that land north of Guthrie after all." Disappointment flickered briefly. She had assumed they would eventually divide their time between the two properties. "I see," she said carefully. "Have you found a better location?" "I have," Aaron confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Right here." Elizabeth blinked in confusion. "Here, on my homestead." "Our homestead," he corrected gently. "If you'll have me, that is." He finally withdrew the object he'd been touching in his pocket, a small velvet box that he opened to reveal a simple gold ring with a modest diamond. "Elizabeth Vaughn, these past months have shown me what I want more than anything, not land of my own, but a life with you. Will you marry me?" Joy burst through Elizabeth like the first light of dawn. "Yes," she whispered, then more confidently, "yes." Aaron's smile rivaled the setting sun as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I thought we could combine our dreams," he explained. "Maintain your father's crops on the eastern section, develop a small cattle breeding operation on the western portion. Together, we could make this land everything it was meant to be." "A true partnership," Elizabeth said, understanding completely. "Just as we've been from the start, really." They were married 3 weeks later in the miller's parlor in Guthrie, with James performing the ceremony and Sarah standing as Elizabeth's attendant. Caleb Wilson served as best man, proudly announcing that he'd accepted a permanent position as foreman on their developing ranch. As winter approached, bringing with it short days and long nights, Elizabeth found unexpected joy in the season she had dreaded facing alone. The cabin was warm and secure, their provisions ample, and each evening brought the pleasure of shared meals and conversations before the fireplace. One such evening, as snow fell gently outside, Aaron unfolded a newspaper he'd brought back from a supply run to Guthrie. "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. "Territorial governor approves railroad spur through Cimarron Valley. That's our valley, Elizabeth." She moved to read over his shoulder. "The junction's going to be 3 miles south of us," she noted. "Far enough to avoid disruption, close enough to benefit from easier access to markets." Blackwell was right about one thing, Aaron mused. "This land will be worth far more with the railroad coming through. Not that we're selling, of course." "Never," Elizabeth agreed firmly. "Though we might consider expanding eventually. That section to the north would make excellent grazing land." Aaron pulled her onto his lap, kissing her soundly. "Always thinking ahead, Mrs. Prescott." "I learned from the best, Mr. Prescott," she replied, settling comfortably against him. "My father always said a homesteader needs vision to see not just what is, but what could be." "A wise man," Aaron said, his arms tightening around her. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you," Elizabeth assured him. "He valued honesty and courage above all else." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the wind outside. Elizabeth found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment, from a chance encounter on the prairie to a shared life full of purpose and love. "What are you thinking about?" Aaron asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how everything changed the day Penny stumbled into that prairie dog hole," she replied honestly. "I was so frightened when I fell, so certain it was the end of everything. Instead, it was just the beginning." Aaron nodded, understanding completely. "Life has a way of surprising us," he agreed. "Who would have thought a broken ankle would lead to all this? And a cowboy who stopped to help," Elizabeth added softly. "Who bandaged my leg and promised to get me home." "I did keep that promise," Aaron pointed out with a smile. "Just took a more roundabout path than either of us expected." "The best journeys often do," Elizabeth replied, resting her head against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that their journey together was really just beginning. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the prairie in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting golden light over the home they had built together. And in Elizabeth's heart, gratitude overflowed for the twist of fate that had brought Aaron Prescott into her life, the injury that might have ended everything, but instead had opened the door to a love deeper and more enduring than she had ever dared to dream possible. As spring returned to the Oklahoma territory, bringing with it new growth and possibility, Elizabeth and Aaron Prescott's homestead flourished under their combined care. The winter wheat sprouted in vibrant green rows across the eastern fields, while the small herd of cattle Aaron had carefully selected grazed contentedly on the western pastures. The railroad spur was under construction to the south, promising easier access to markets once completed. Life settled into a rhythm that was both challenging and deeply satisfying. Each day brought new tasks, new decisions to be made together, new opportunities to build the future they had envisioned during those long winter evenings. They worked side by side from dawn till dusk most days, learning each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses with an ease that seemed to Elizabeth like a kind of magic. By the early summer of 1890, another change was evident, one that filled both Elizabeth and Aaron with anticipation and joy. Her increasing roundness could no longer be hidden beneath loose clothing, and the local midwife confirmed what they had suspected. A baby would join their household before the year's end. "October, I'd say," Mrs. Peterson had declared after examining Elizabeth. "A harvest baby. They bring good luck, you know." Aaron's reaction to the news had been everything Elizabeth could have hoped for: initial shock giving way to wonder, then irrepressible happiness. He became even more protective, insisting she rest more frequently and delegate the heavier work to Caleb and the 2 additional hands they had hired for the expanded operation. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," Elizabeth protested one afternoon when Aaron caught her attempting to mend the chicken coop. "Women have been having babies while working homestead since the beginning of time." "Not my wife, not with my child," Aaron replied firmly, taking the hammer from her hands. "At least not when there are plenty of capable men around to handle the repairs." Elizabeth relented, recognizing that his concern came from love rather than a desire to control. In truth, she was grateful for the opportunity to focus on preparing their home for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny garments from fabric purchased in Guthrie, transforming a corner of their bedroom into a nursery area with a cradle Aaron crafted from oak. Sarah Miller visited regularly, bringing baby clothes she had saved from her own children's infancy, and offering advice on everything from morning sickness to the best techniques for swaddling. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," she assured Elizabeth during one such visit as they sat shelling peas on the porch. "I can already see it in how you prepare." Elizabeth smiled, though a shadow of doubt crossed her face. I hope so. My own mother died when I was 12, you know. Sometimes I worry that I've forgotten the important things she taught me. Sarah squeezed her hand reassuringly. Motherhood comes naturally when the time arrives, and you have something many women don't: a husband who will be a true partner in raising this child. He's already talking about teaching the baby to ride as soon as it can sit up. Elizabeth laughed. I told him walking might be a reasonable first step. As her pregnancy advanced, Elizabeth found unexpected pleasure in the quieter rhythm of her days. While Aaron and the hands managed the physical labor of the homestead, she focused on ensuring the household ran smoothly, preserving the garden's bounty for winter, keeping accounts of their growing enterprise, and corresponding with other homesteaders about forming a cooperative to strengthen their position with the railroad company. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch enjoying the cooler air after a scorching day, Aaron surprised her with news from town. "Remember Victor Holloway?" he asked, accepting the glass of lemonade she offered. "Not likely to forget the man who burned down my home," Elizabeth replied dryly. "What about him?" "He's finished serving his sentence, got less time than Blackwell, as you recall. Word is he's left the territory, headed for Wyoming or Montana." Aaron studied her face. "Thought you'd want to know he won't be trouble for us anymore." Elizabeth nodded, one hand resting protectively on her swollen abdomen. "Good, though I stopped being afraid of men like him a long time ago." Aaron covered her hand with his own, feeling the baby's movements beneath his palm. "That's what I love about you, Elizabeth Prescott. You never stay afraid for long." "Not with you beside me," she replied, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the prairie gold. The baby arrived on a crisp October morning, just as Mrs. Peterson had predicted: a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes, and a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world in no uncertain terms. They named him Thomas James Prescott, honoring both Elizabeth's father and their friend who had helped make their happiness possible. Aaron proved himself as adept at fatherhood as he was at ranching, taking to midnight feedings and diaper changes with the same determination he brought to every challenge. Elizabeth watched in amused affection as the man who could break the wildest bronco walked the floor with their son, singing trail songs in a gentle voice until the baby settled. "You're a natural," she commented one night, finding them in the rocking chair by the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully against his father's chest. Aaron looked up with a smile that still made her heart skip after more than a year of marriage. "He makes it easy," he whispered, carefully rising to place the infant in his cradle. "Besides, I had a good teacher in my own father. He believed raising children was a man's job as much as a woman's." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the homestead continued to prosper. The railroad spur was completed in the spring of 1891, transforming the nearby junction into a small but bustling depot where their cattle and crops could be shipped directly to eastern markets. The increased profits allowed them to purchase the adjacent northern section they had discussed, expanding their operation significantly. Caleb Wilson, who had proven himself invaluable as foreman, was offered a partnership in the ranching side of the business. "Consider it thanks for standing guard that night when we went to Guthrie," Aaron told him. "Without you, we might not have had a homestead to return to." By the summer of 1892, the Prescott Ranch was recognized as one of the most successful operations in the territory. Their innovative approach, combining traditional farming with selective cattle breeding, drew visitors from as far away as Kansas City, eager to learn their methods. Elizabeth took particular pride in the orchard she had planted where the original cabin had stood: apple, pear, and cherry trees that would provide fruit for generations to come. "A living memorial to my father," she explained to Aaron. "He always wanted an orchard but didn't live to plant one." Their family grew again with the arrival of a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, in the autumn of 1893. Unlike her brother's dramatic entry into the world, little Sarah arrived quickly and with minimal fuss, setting the pattern for her placid personality. "One of each," Aaron remarked proudly, cradling his newborn daughter while 3-year-old Thomas peered curiously at his sister. "Just like we hoped." Life was not without its challenges, of course. The drought of 1894 tested even the most established farms and ranches in the territory. The Prescotts survived better than most, thanks to the water rights they had secured for the 3 streams that crossed their property, and the diversification that meant they didn't rely solely on crops or cattle. Through it all, the partnership that had begun with a chance encounter on the prairie deepened and strengthened. Elizabeth and Aaron faced each new challenge together, their complementary strengths creating a resilience that neither would have possessed alone. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Aaron surprised Elizabeth with a gift that brought tears to her eyes: a framed copy of her father's original homestead deed, alongside the documents showing their subsequent acquisitions. "From 160 acres to nearly 1,000, he said, tracing the boundaries on the accompanying map. "Your father would be proud of what you've built, Elizabeth." "What we've built," she corrected, her arms encircling his waist. "I couldn't have done it without you, Aaron." He turned in her embrace, his eyes reflecting the same devotion she had first glimpsed that day on the prairie when he had bandaged her injured leg. "We make a good team, Mrs. Prescott." "The best," she agreed, stretching up to kiss him. "And we're just getting started." As twilight settled over the Oklahoma prairie, painting the land in hues of purple and gold, the Prescott homestead stood as a testament to what courage, determination, and love could accomplish. From the main house with its wide, welcoming porch to the barns and outbuildings, from the fields of ripening wheat to the pastures where their prize cattle grazed, everything spoke of dreams realized and promises kept. Inside, lamps glowed warmly against the gathering darkness. Children's laughter echoed from the nursery, where Thomas was entertaining his sister with elaborate stories of his own invention. In the kitchen, Elizabeth and Aaron moved in the comfortable choreography of long partnership, preparing supper together as they discussed plans for the coming harvest. Their life was not the one either had envisioned before that fateful day when Elizabeth's horse had stumbled, and Aaron had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer. It was something richer, more challenging, and infinitely more rewarding than either could have imagined alone. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness: a cowboy who had stopped to help an injured woman, bandaged her leg, and promised to get her home. A promise that had led them both to the home they were truly meant to find. One built not of logs and nails, but of shared dreams, mutual respect, and enduring love.